first of all, thank you all for joining me. This is a new platform for me. I do have an online course, but that was pre-taped in advance and edited. So going live and trying to teach live and have interaction with you all is definitely a new experience for me. I gave this workshop what seems like ages ago, but was only 2 weeks ago at the library before they had to close their operations. So we'll see how it goes online. So thank you all for being with me today and for joining the group. From what I have seen in terms of the introductions, and I haven't yet gone through all of the introductions of the new group members. There's an incredible amount of collective knowledge in this group, and I hope we can use it as we move forward. So for those of you who don't know me, I run a business here in Bozeman, Montana called Broken Ground, where I teach people how to grow their own food and design more self-reliant homesteads. So I do consultations, I do designs for clients, and I also hold these types of workshops. In the past, it's been mostly live workshops, but we'll see how it goes moving forward. So thanks so much to everyone for being here. Yes, so I'm just looking right now at some of the comments. Yes, this will be recorded, or it is being recorded just naturally as a Facebook Live, so it will be available on the forum. And I'm still figuring out some of this stuff since I'm not super tech savvy, so bear with me, but it will be posted on the forum. So if you miss it today or you can't go through all of it today, it will be available. Great. So let's just get started. Welcome to the workshop, to the online class, 3 tips to designing your dream homestead, no matter how big or small. So I wanted to start out just by acknowledging this. This is a quote by Bill Mollison, one of the co-originators of permaculture, saying, though the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple. And I think learning how to grow our own food and become more self-reliant are a lot of those solutions. And I know a lot of us right now, well, all over the world are experiencing an increasingly complex problem, but a lot of the solutions are right here at our fingertips. I like to start out just to give you a sense of who I am and why I do this work. My grandmother was a homesteader. She lived in central Minnesota and had 6 kids. This is my dad right here. And I think he was having a pretty bad day, I'm not sure why. But from 1943 to 1956, she actually kept diaries of what she did almost every single day. And my father found these diaries when they were moving her from her home to a nursing home. And they had not known that she'd kept these diaries. And she had an accounting of everything that she did. So she'd have like canned 12 quarts of tomatoes, canned 12 quarts of beans, made butter. So they had a big garden, they had chickens, they had a milk cow for some time, and she spent a lot of time either growing food, harvesting food, preserving food, or obviously washing clothes, washing kids, and doing all of that stuff. But ironically, I did not learn any of my homesteading skills from my grandmother. It took me, and I'm sure that a lot of you are maybe in the same boat where you had either parents or grandparents that knew how to grow their own food, and somehow over the course of one generation, as industrial agriculture moved in, we lost that ability. And now, now more than ever, I hate to say that term, a lot of people are using it right now, is a really good time to build more self-reliance and to grow more food. So, and just a little bit about me, I learned how to garden organically from other people, just like some of you may learn from me or from others in this group. And so we're just kind of relearning a skill that probably a lot of our grandparents and great-grandparents knew. So let's just move on to a little bit about me. Some of you know this already. Some of you may have even visited my property, but we live on a 3/4 acre lot in Bozeman, Montana. And we have a greenhouse to extend the season. We have a pond that captures water off of our roof and then grows a bunch of aquatic plants. And then we have a fairly substantial annual garden space where I grow a lot of veggies. And then we have an even larger what's called a food forest of fruit trees and berry bushes in our, what we call the back 40, but the back of our yard. And these are some of the products that came out of our food forest last year. So we have pears and plums and grapes and a bunch of different medicinal plants, some apples, raspberries, chokeberries, cherries, and alpine strawberries and regular strawberries. So we have a lot of food coming out of that food forest and also in our annual production. We then, we also have chickens. Sorry, I'm using this interesting, here we go. We also have chickens. So we have them just for the eggs and obviously fertilizer and all of those things. And then we also, we used to have ducks, but we don't have ducks anymore. And my husband is also a hunter, so we, together with the wild game meat and the food that's coming out of the food forest and the annual gardens, we produce a good portion of our own food. Not as much as I'd like to, but we're certainly on our way. And for example, we're still eating a ton of the fruit from the food forest. It's all frozen or dehydrated. And so, as many of you know, gardening and homesteading gives you the opportunity to build that self-reliance, and even in a cold climate like in Bozeman, Montana, be able to be eating from your garden for a good portion of the year. So let's get into the actual content and meat of this course. One thing that you might want to do is so there's a handout associated with this workshop that might be helpful. It's not necessary to have it in front of you, but it could be helpful to follow along. So if you go, obviously all of you are on a computer, or you may be watching this from your phone. So if not, no worries. But if you do go to my website, brokengroundpermaculture.com, you can see that here. And you go down to workshops and events and designing your dream homestead, you will see right here, download the worksheet either as a PDF or as a Word file. So if you are on your computer and you want to follow along in terms of my 3 tips, you can download that right there. Again, like I said, I'm kind of figuring out what the best platform is to deliver these workshops. I might be going over to Zoom or something else further on, but I thought that just going live on Facebook would be just a good experiment. So again, go to my website, brokengroundpermaculture.com, go to services, go to workshops and events, designing your dream homestead, click on designing your dream homestead, and nestled in there are the worksheets either as a PDF or a Word file. So let me know actually if you can get those, or if you're having trouble, just let me know. But that's a good follow along in terms of what I'll be covering. So let's start with tip number 1. The other thing is, just so you know that these tips that I'm going over can be applied at any scale. So what I'm going to be covering is some big picture thinking in this class, and then I have a couple other classes where we go into more detail. So we're not going to get into during this class, we're not going to get into the nuts and bolts of, how you plant carrots or how you plant beets or something like that. I'm going to give you kind of a big picture canvas as to how to think about going about designing your homestead. So you can, these tools or tips can be applied at an acreage level scale. They can be applied at a suburban level. Here we go. Sorry. They can be applied like at a suburban level scale. They can also be applied at a balcony level. So just, these are kind of a framework to begin to look at your site. Okay, so first, forgetting what I'm talking about, sorry here. Gonna figure this out. So first of all, what I am gonna be talking about too is kind of based in this whole concept of permaculture. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with permaculture if you've followed me for some time, or just in general, permaculture is becoming more and more mainstream or well-known. And what permaculture is it stands for permanent agriculture or permanent culture, and it's a design approach for sustainable living and land use that's rooted in the observation of natural systems. So a lot of what I'm going to be teaching you is connected to permaculture and this design approach that we have. Another way of looking at it is the harmonious integration of landscape and people that provides food, energy, shelter, and other needs in a sustainable way. And you may have seen that I am going to do a more in-depth class on permaculture this coming Saturday. So if you're interested, definitely tune in. It's at 9 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. So definitely join me for that. I'm going to be going more into the history, definitions, and in particular the permaculture principles and how they can be applied to the design of your yard and your life for that matter. There's a lot of ways in which we can look at this current pandemic and use permaculture principles to work through solutions. So the tip number one, and before I go into this, let me just see what other, I'm just seeing the comments here. Yes, Celine, I will probably be doing a garden tour. Well, hopefully, if we're all allowed to meet, maybe we can have a 6 feet apart garden tour. I will likely be doing one of those in July, so you should definitely plan on that. Great that people have gotten the handout. Awesome. Oh, thank you, Erin, for posting that. That's great. That's great. So for those of you who haven't seen, Erin Jackson posted a direct link to the workshop, to the worksheet. So the first tip is to determine your goals. So this is one of the most important parts of a design. If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. So basically, when I do consultations for clients, that is oftentimes my first question before we talk about where the greenhouse or the garden goes or what they're gonna do. Because what I wanna have a sense of is their vision of what they wanna build and big picture vision, not just I want to grow some carrots, but what is your goal for your property? So if someone tells me I want to be pandemic proof, right? Or I want to be as self-reliant as possible. I want to grow all of my own food. That goal looks a lot different than someone that says, I just want some summer season vegetables, right? That's going to determine how many beds you put in, whether you do perennial plantings, whether you have a greenhouse. All of those things are answered by getting really clear on your goals. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to answer these questions for yourself. So in that handout, if you have it, or if you don't, these questions are right here. What do you want your landscape to do for you? So what is your big picture vision? What do you hope to achieve? Consider financial stability, quality of life, food production. And then what you want to do is craft a statement of purpose for your project that reflects the whole of your future system. So what's the fundamental reason for establishing your homestead? And I think for a lot of us, that may have looked a little different if I would have asked that question 2 months ago. There's definitely an uptick and interest in building homesteads, growing more food. I wanted to build more self-reliance for myself, just from a principled standpoint of lowering my ecological footprint, you know, doing something positive towards the climate crisis, and also reconnecting to the natural world. So, but now I think for a lot of people, this is looking a little different. We're moving more towards, victory gardens. Like I posted in the forum a couple days ago, in terms of what do we need to, provide a good portion of food for ourselves. Though one thing that I do want to mention is, we're looking at self-reliance. And I think one of the things that the situation is showing us is that we need to rely on each other. And we've seen, at least in Bozeman, in this local community, a lot of people coming together around helping those in need, setting up networks of mutual aid, talking with their neighbors while physically distancing, keeping in touch with people. I think that's going to be really important during this time. So self-sufficiency is about being holed up somewhere on your own, trying to provide for all of your own food. Self-reliance is about doing what you can, but also relying on our local growers, also relying on our small businesses, also relying on our neighbors. And we are inherently social people. So we need to remember that we thrive in communities, and not to isolate as well. So what I want you all to do is I want you to consider all of these questions, and take just a few minutes. I don't know if we can do this in the online space, but I'd like for you all to take just 2 or 3 minutes to answer some of these questions. And if you're so inclined, I'd love it if you posted them in the comments. I'd love to know what some of your goals are for your property. And what's so exciting about seeing everyone who's introduced themselves on this forum is people are there. You may be super new to homesteading or growing some of your own food, but it sounds like a lot of people already have some experience with it. But going through this and revisiting this in terms of what your big picture vision is super important. So if you can take just 2 or 3 minutes to answer these questions, and if any of you would like to put your big picture vision share it in the comments, I would love that, and then we can respond to it. I should have some kind of music while we wait, but definitely take some time. And then for those of you who've just joined, there is a handout available that you can work from. And if you go up in the comments, Erin Jackson has posted that handout, or you can go to my website, brokengroundpermaculture.com, and then go to services, scroll down to workshops, and it'll be there under designing your homestead. How are people doing? Are people picking up this whole live thing, or is it dropping? Let me know. I'm just going to give you a few moments. And again, if you want that handout, it's under services, workshops and events, and designing your dream homestead. Right here and here. Anyone want to share their goals? Okay, so Celine says, my goal is self-reliance and also still activism. I want to reduce my carbon footprint by growing food locally and encourage people around me to grow food. Awesome. To grow food as a collective. Yes, absolutely. Dee says, I would like to increase my food production to be able to preserve for the winter. I also want my yard to be one of beauty across the seasons. A lot of permaculture food forests you see on YouTube are not focused on appearance. Oh, that is so true, Dee. So my husband does constantly remind me, and, remember, this is not a junk show. So yes, I think that that's totally true. And food forests and permaculture and edible landscapes can be absolutely beautiful. But I think the whole sheet mulching and straw and wood chips sometimes in people's yards makes it look a little unkempt. But great, great goal. Lori, provide more food for my family, create bird and bee habitat. Awesome. I hope to achieve an increase in my self-sufficiency as well as the potential to create added value products to trade within my community. So great. Yeah, that's awesome. I think one thing that this whole crisis is showing us is this, you're thinking about the economy and how, there's all this fear around the economy collapsing, and really the potential to go back to more of a barter system, the potential to exchange things with your friends and neighbors, where you're not as reliant on a monetary system to do so. That's great. Thank you. Yes. Okay, great. Video quality is great. Adrian. Hi, Adrian. I have a small backyard garden with raised beds. I want to have a beautiful space where I can enjoy coffee and wine. Awesome. We probably need a little bit more of that these days. I'd love to add vegetables as well as pollinators for bees. I'd love to be able to freeze, can some food, even though I have a small space. Great. So this is a good example, actually, of don't let the size of your space limit your goals. Right? So don't already shut down an idea of, if you want self-reliance, if you want 75% self-reliance or 100% self-reliance, go with what your goals are, and then you're going to design for that. So it can mean, of course, that in a small space, you're stacking a lot of things, you're going vertically, you're using your space to the best of your ability, but then you're also relying on your neighbors or your friends or the local growers to, again, that becomes a life design that's much bigger than just your backyard. So that's fantastic. Hi, Chelsea. Chelsea says, I want our garden bed in the back to provide fresh veggies for our family this summer. We tried for the first time last summer and we all of a sudden had way too much of one thing to consume. Great. I want it to look pretty as well. Awesome. So that's great. So Chelsea wants summer vegetables. So that would be something where if I had a client that said that, my recommendation would be, great, put in, 3 to 4 4x8 raised beds, or start with 2. Actually, better idea. Start with 2, see how that goes, and then grow into your garden. But really plan for what you want to grow. And that's something that I tell my clients, that if you have a limited amount of space, or you don't have a lot of time, or whatever it might be, you want to be growing things that are best picked fresh out of your garden. So in other words, if I had to choose, I would be growing tomatoes, I would be growing greens, lettuces, kales, all of that kind of stuff. I'd be growing a lot of herbs. So things that are best picked fresh, and not things like potatoes or carrots or onions, because those are things that local growers can grow fairly easily at scale, and they're fairly inexpensive also to buy from local growers. You can get those really fairly cheap at the farmer's market, local organically grown carrots, for example. So if you do have a limited amount of space, limit it to the things like a great lettuce mix, or there's nothing better than a freshly picked tomato. Limit it to those things rather than some of your root crop types of foods. So let's see, what else do we have? Oh, and Adrian says, I want to teach my children how to be sustainable and take care of the earth. Awesome. Yeah, cool. Absolutely. Yes, Sky says, agreed. It reminds me of the permaculture idea of limitations create abundance. Yes. So big picture vision, what are your goals? And then from there, crafting a statement of purpose. So let's see. So that was that. Well, that worked out pretty well. Thank you all for participating. That was great. That was our group exercise. So tip number 2 for designing your dream homestead is observing your site. And this is actually a permaculture principle, and it's the prime directive of permaculture is observing natural systems. So observation of your site is super important. What are the patterns that you see on your site? So natural systems have all sorts of patterns, right? But on your particular site, what are the patterns in nature that you see? So where does the water collect on your site? Where are the microclimates? Where's the sun? Where's the shade? Where is it super dry? Where do you like to hang out in the morning? Where do you stay away from when that west sun comes in, that really searing hot west sun? So all of those patterns on your site are really important to observe because they're going to determine, what you put where and how to design your site appropriately. And instead, what ends up happening a lot in our culture is we are not harmonizing with the patterns. So for example, we'll see a kind of moist patch on our property and we're like, I gotta get rid of that. I need to pump water away from that area. Permaculture and this type of design work asks, well, okay, if that site is particularly moist, then that's where you put moisture-loving plants, right? So you're harmonizing with an existing pattern rather than fighting against it. So another thing that you want to keep in mind when you're observing your site is, again, so microclimates, sun and shade patterns, slope, where's the water running off and running down, water and wind patterns, existing resources, and of course, wildlife is a huge component. So if you're in Montana, many of you are in this group, obviously, depending on where you live, you may or may not have wildlife pressure. It's important to understand that pattern. Where is the wildlife? A lot of deer. If you have a lot of acreage, maybe you even have elk or moose or bear going through your property. So really important to understand that pattern of where the wildlife move. For a lot of people in Montana, it's everywhere if you don't have a fence. So, for us, we put up a 7-foot fence. That was one of the first things that we did on our property because it got back to my goals of, we want to be a demonstration site for cold climate permaculture and to inspire and educate people how to grow their own food. So if that's my goal, that's a fairly large goal, I probably need to fence my entire site because I'm going to put a lot of time and energy, sweat equity into my property, and I don't necessarily want it just all for the deer. So, so keep in mind observing your site and this whole idea in permaculture of the problem is the solution. So what that means is Bill Mollison, the co-originator of permaculture, said, it's not that there are too many slugs in your garden, it's that there aren't enough ducks. So, and another view that I have is, it's not that there are too many suburbs that are growing in Bozeman, Montana, it's that there aren't enough gardens. So that inherent in the problem, there is a solution. Just like that moist patch or that kind of wet patch in your yard becomes potentially a site for a pond or a site for moisture-loving plants, right? So I like to give this example of when we first moved to Bozeman, we moved into this rental, and it had been a rental for years, and the garage was chock full of junk, basically. And so we were giving stuff away, we had to throw some stuff away, and then we also were giving stuff to the thrift store. And there was this this thing that was left in there that was one of those things that you put magazines on, in a store that twirls around and you put magazines on it. And I tried to give it to the thrift store and they're like, we don't want your junk, thank you very much. And so I was like, okay, so how can I use this? And so we ended up making this, basically this like hoop house. And I had recently moved to Bozeman, and a lot of people had told me that tomatoes were kind of impossible to grow, or they were really challenging to grow in this climate. And I decided, okay, well, we'll make like a mini greenhouse out of it. And the little stand, we turned that around and used that as a bird bath, converted that into a bird bath. And then I got a ton of tomatoes out of that little hoop house thing. So again, problem is the solution. So really approach the observation of your site from that perspective. So you're just observing and you're not judging necessarily what is on your site. And then you can go back and say, okay, how can I turn this into a solution? Let me just see here in terms of the comments. Chris says, we're using the USDA to help us do much of the planning on our property and manage a few systems you mentioned. Awesome, great. Yes. Adrian says, and don't forget the vole movement pattern. Yeah, how many people are having problems with voles? We just, now that the snow is melting on our site, we're seeing a lot of vole damage, not nearly as much as last year. So, you know, one of it's not that you have too many voles on your property, it's that you don't have enough cats. I mean, that's the unfortunate reality, is that I'm allergic to cats. We have so many birds on our property that I don't necessarily want to set the birds up for being murdered. So it's kind of a hard call in terms of the voles, but definitely an issue, absolutely. Any problems that people want to mention here in the comment thread while I'm on here? Things that we could maybe think of in terms of solutions? So let me know. Comment, put it in the comments if you've been having issues and you don't quite know what to do with them. And then we'll move on to tip number 3. So I don't know. Do we see any? Or enough owls, exactly, Adrian. Yeah, that is what we're thinking of doing for the vole issue, is if we can't get cats, or we don't want to get a cat, to set up some owl nesting sites and to attract them to our site. And I think a lot of this is all about, you know, this is why I love gardening and permaculture so much, is it's an invitation to connect more to the natural world and to realize that our system is out of balance. And so as we move and work on these properties, we get more of a sense of accepting the feedback and adapting accordingly. And a lot of these ecosystems are kind of working themselves out. So any way that you can help them along is a good idea. So yes, so the third tip is to actually map your site. So though it's okay to go on the ground and kind of look at your site and think about what you would put where, it's a little bit easier if you actually map it, because it makes you understand kind of flow patterns, and it's a really great way to map what you have existing on your site and the patterns. So the patterns will inform the design. So you want to create a base map of your property. Does anyone have a map of their property? I'm sure some of you out there do. But if you don't have a map of your property, then I'd suggest you do one. Now you can, if you have a new development, you might already have an existing plat map, or if you had a house built, then you have maybe the architectural drawing, so that's ideal. If it's fairly new and you have the architectural drawings, you already have the property lines, you have where the house is, and you can go from there. But if you don't, the easiest way to produce a map is just to go to Google Maps or Google Earth and take a screenshot and produce a map that way. It won't be exact, but what it allows you to do is it just allows you to be able to play on paper with where you want things to go on your site. So make sure that when you create the base map, you have the property lines, you have the critical site features, the walkways, the clotheslines, the septic tank, leach field, all of that kind of stuff that's existing on there. Any existing trees, all of that, so that you can start from there. So you can either put that map on an 11 by 17 if you want to get really fancy. You can put it on a bigger you know, 18 by 22, but that will help you in terms of getting things down on paper. And it's not that, you know, that'll be site plans are dynamic, and that's something that we need to understand, that you may have a master plan, but that will change, that will likely change over time, but at least it gives you a starting point. And then what you want to do with that map is you want to do what's called a sector analysis of your site. And again, this comes from permaculture thinking. And the idea is that oftentimes I'll have clients come to me and say, oh, well, it's totally blank slate. You know, it's just flat and it's a lawn. But it actually, so they don't know where to start, in other words. You know, what should I put where? But it actually isn't a blank slate because you have all of these different sectors that are coming onto your site. So you have the winter sun sector. Again, that tracks really low. You know, it's still tracking pretty low right now. And then you have the summer sun sector that tracks a little bit higher. You may have a scenic view that you don't want to cut off, where you wouldn't want to put, you know, high growing trees. There may be an area where, sorry, this is kind of hidden by the thing, where there's a lot of noise. So you want to mitigate that area there. Like, for example, we're right on Bridger Drive. So a lot of noise, getting more and more busy. So we want to potentially mitigate that noise. You have prevailing winds that are coming onto your site. You may have winter winds, you may have storms. If you are out kind of on acreage or connected to national forest, there might be a fire sector of, if there were to be a wildfire, what direction would it come from? And then of course there might be a wildlife sector. Or there might be a sector where there's a lot of pollution from cars, from the road. So what you're trying to do is understand everything that's coming onto your site. And then you're mapping it accordingly. So if you have winds, prevailing winds from this area, does it mean that you want to channel that energy towards your site or away from your site? And what I mean by that is you may, you know, if there's prevailing winds from this direction, you may put a windbreak here, right? Or you may set up a wind turbine. So it just depends on whether you want to channel that energy away or towards your site. This area, of course, right here, barring any, obviously this is very simplified, right? But barring any existing trees, this area right here is the full sun spot, best spot for your annual garden space, right? This would not be a good area for your food forest, even though there might be full sun, because you don't want to block your scenic view. So it might make more sense over here. So all of a sudden, as you start to overlay these sectors onto your map, you start to make a few decisions in terms of what to put where. So that's really important. Are there any questions? Let's see. Yes, Chelsea, you said, do you have any suggestions for what to plant to mitigate road noise? So that is a difficult one. Oftentimes berms are more effective, but if you can't do a berm, more than anything, so water is good. Running water is a good thing. If you have a pond or something like that, that often mitigates road noise. And then also, even if it doesn't technically mitigate road noise, any kind of visual barrier helps. So if you put a hedge, you know, a shrub hedge or something like that, I think that helps mentally keep you kind of contained in an area rather than kind of open and exposed. So those are some ideas. Please keep questions coming as we work through this. So we're mapping your site, so you're knowing kind of what sectors are coming onto your site, which is going to determine what you put where. And then you're also doing something that in permaculture is called zone analysis. So what this is that you care for and maintain what you see on a regular basis. So you want things that need your daily use and maintenance close to the house. So oftentimes what happens, or when I've gone to clients' properties, they have their garden, you know, 50 or 60 feet from their house, you know, and it's, you know, fenced or something like that, which is fine, but that's really hard in terms of maintaining. So what permaculture teaches is that if your house is right here, then the zones kind of emanate out, and your zone 1 is pretty close into the house. You know, there's no hard and fast rule, but it's maybe 20 feet from the house. That's where your daily use and maintenance, herbs, kitchen gardens, compost pile, most structures are within your zone 1. So for example, I have my herb garden and my annual garden space where I have the tomatoes and the peppers and the lettuces, everything that needs like more care is very close into my house. So it's like 20 feet from my back door. And the greenhouse as well is, 30 feet from the back door. Because of course that's something early on in the season while there's still snow on the ground, you're wanting to access. You can get in there and plant sooner. So you want that fairly close in. And then your zone 2 are things that only need your weekly use or maintenance. So that's where you have your winter and storage crops. So what I mean by that is your winter squashes, your onions, your potatoes, your beets, your carrots, all of that can go out further because it doesn't need your daily use or maintenance. If you have that on irrigation, then you're only having to look at it once or twice a week. It grows for the entire season, and then you harvest it at the end of the season. So it doesn't need to be so close to your house. Granted, if you have a small yard, everything's probably close, so that's not as big a deal, but even you can do that on a micro scale. So for example, I have, my annual gardens really close in, like I said, 20, 30 feet. And then I have my food forest that you saw at the beginning of the presentation, and that's like a 100-foot walk further out, because fruit trees, berry bushes, all sorts of perennial stuff doesn't need my maintenance all the time. I just need to glance at it every once in a while, and it's just chugging away, growing without me fiddling with it that much. So that's something to keep in mind. And then if you have acreage, zone 3 is for grazing animals and forage crops and larger ponds. And then zone 4 is farm forestry. So that's keeping in mind that if we want self-reliant homesteads, we're looking at also potentially heating with wood, a new renewable resource. So we're having to grow potentially timber crops. So obviously at this level, a lot of us don't have the space to do that. But that's where you're looking at your life design of, if I want to be as self-reliant as possible, it doesn't only have to come from my site, right? It can come from my community. And so if you need, say, compost, for example, you might not produce it all on your site because you just don't have the materials for it, but you can get it from, say, for example, in our community, Happy Trash Can or Yes Compost that do residential compost pickup and turn that into compost for gardens in the community, right? So on that level, we're kind of closing the loop in our community in terms of food waste, and then we're able to source things locally. And I was thinking about that, especially now, in this space where we can't get a lot of things, and it's like, well, what if we can't get soil or plants or seeds or any of those types of things, right? Can we source enough of those things locally? And definitely, I think through this forum and this group, in order to provide for ourselves. So, and then the last zone on your map is the wilderness area. So if you have acreage, the recommendation is that most of your property is zone 5 wilderness, right? That you want things really tight in around your house. Even if you have 25 acres, you're not going to develop 25 acres. 1, because that would be craziness. That would be crazy to maintain. And 2, because you want to keep things tight in for convenience and maintenance sake in and around your house, and the rest can just be for you to go out and enjoy. And so every yard, even if you're in an urban area or suburban area, probably has a zone 5 area, right? It's that Siberian pea shrub hedge. It's that lilac bush. It's that ash tree. Those are things that are, we learn from those natural systems, and we use them as a place for contemplation, and we don't mess or manipulate them. So that's kind of the way that you kind of look at your site. Let me have a look at the questions here. So is it Kay, am I saying your name right? Kay or Kai said, are there any resources to help analyze direction of wind, sun, etc.? Yes, there are definitely, you would have, I don't know where you're located, but there are resources out there that have prevailing winds. You can, usually Googling it, climate data, if you can get climate data for your region. And also there is a sun calculator, and I'll link to that in response to your question, just to understand your sun patterns on your property. Oh, great, Chelsea, you are building a berm. That's awesome. That's awesome. So Adrian asks, what is an example of a forage crop? So a forage crop is if you have forage animals like goats, or you have or sheep or something like that. So they have pasture. So you might have alfalfa or something like that. So if you're doing a forage area for your animals, that's going to be further out on your site. So that is the zone. So what you're doing here is you have your map, you have your base map, and then you have your sector analysis on top of that base map, and then you have your zone analysis. So all of a sudden it's becoming clear on where you should put things, because you want to keep things close in on your site, and you want to recognize and position things based on the patterns on your site. So all of a sudden you don't have such a blank slate, and you're able to kind of work through where to put what. And then what I would recommend here with your site is understanding all the elements that you want on your site. So what I mean by elements what are the components that you want to have? Do you want a greenhouse? Do you want a pond? Do you want a barn? Do you want chickens? Do you want a compost pile? Do you want an annual garden? Do you want a food forest? All of those things, you want to understand all of those different things that you want to have on your site, and then you start to map them. You know, you do a bubble diagram of here's where the food forest goes, and here's where the annual garden is going to go, and here's where the berm is going to go, and here's where the windbreak is going to go. So you start to map it out that way. Don't get really detailed from the get-go in terms of, I'm going to draw my like 4 by raised beds down here on this drawing. Just have general ideas, bubbles of where you want things to go, and then later you can start to refine that design. So those are the 3 tips. So again, sorry, coming up with the goals for your property. I've forgotten my own tips. So coming up for the goals of your property, observing your site, and then mapping your site are going to kind of get you in the direction of where you want to go. A lot of people who have existing sites, you may want to revisit this in terms of if you're thinking about expanding, or you want to allow for changes on your property, or if things aren't working very well. I'm working with a client right now where they kind of hodgepodged everything together, and now they're really wanting to create this integrated system because it feels a little bit like there's stagnation in one area and they're not flowing in another area, and it just doesn't feel very well set up. So this will get you started. Any other questions related to that? Oh, great. Okay, it is K. Right. So what I want to ask, so you've kind of gotten a sense of how to start designing. And in permaculture, there's a principle that's called designing from patterns to details. So this whole class today is all about understanding the patterns, right? The big picture patterns. What are your goals? What's coming onto your site? What are your patterns? Understanding kind of the zone analysis. So it's kind of big picture thinking. Designing from patterns to details is a lot of the stuff around, how many carrots should I grow? How many onions? What should I grow on this site? Those are kind of getting more into the details. And I encourage you all to use this forum as a place to ask questions about those details, because those are important, but it's really most important to get a foundation of what your big picture vision for your site is before you move into the details of where the greenhouse and the gardens are going to go. So just use this forum as a resource, and also use me as a resource for any of those questions along some of those details. So if people are willing, I'd love to know what your next best step is. Now that you kind of have a sense of where you need to go in terms of designing your homestead, please post in the comments, what's your next best step? And I'm just gonna give you a couple minutes to do that. Let's see, where are we at? All right. So working on what's your next best step, that's also in the worksheet. And also, as you work on that or think about that, I'd love it if you shared with me whether this format is also working for you. If it's clear, if you haven't dropped off. I'm just wondering if for the next few classes that I give, whether this, this format works in terms of learning. So anyone want to share a next best step? Go. Okay. All right. Okay, Celine. Okay, so this summer we will plant a windbreak that's composed of edibles or bee-friendly bushes. It's challenging to find edible bushes that are strong enough to resist the cold wind. Absolutely. So one of the things that if you want to establish a windbreak, sometimes you have to temporarily put like a bunch of straw bales in that kind of in the prevailing wind site in order for those things to get established so they have a bit of a chance before they themselves can act as a windbreak. So that's something that you can definitely go do. Cool, Chelsea, I was gonna say make a map, but my husband tells me we already have a map. Awesome, that's great. So yeah, definitely start from there. That's helpful when there's already a map so you don't have to bother with it. Chris says, posted photos above, but couldn't figure out how to do it here. We've used many of these ideas to Neo Homestead 10 acres we purchased near Bozeman using Google Earth Maps and SketchUp to plan zones and phases out. Yes. Here's an overview of our property, phase 1 planning, phase 2 complete. Cool. We've also begun our food forest, planting several hundred trees we plan to fence around this spring. That's a lot of trees, Chris. That's awesome, but that's a lot of trees. Tell me a little bit about, so one thing that I get concerned about with people going really massive scale is just what are your goals? One thing that I didn't mention earlier on is one thing that you want to double check around your goals, knowing what your goals are, but then also double checking that around the lifestyle. Now I know that Chris and Nevada are out there homesteading, and that's kind of their deal, which is awesome. But for people who have more just smaller scale gardens, really check in with yourself in terms of how much time you can dedicate every week to maintaining your property, because that will also determine the scale at which you grow. So say your goals are, I want to have this huge self-reliant property. Don't do that in one season, please. So you want to grow into that. And Laura, who's not on here, but did ask a question before around, you know, I don't know where to start in terms of the design process. You know, what's good to do is to have a master plan, but then do it in phases. Like certainly everything that we've done on our property has been done over the course of 7 growing seasons. So if I look at a master plan and you're starting from 0, I would not hope that you would install all of that in year 1 or even year 2. I would give yourself a 5-year period. I mean, the thing is, I know there's a lot of urgency maybe right now, and you can certainly get started with 2 raised beds, you know, 4x8 raised beds or something like that. But what natural systems invite us to do is to be patient. And I know it's hard to be patient when there's an emergency, but we're in this, and I'm in this for the long game. And, you know, a fruit tree will only grow so quickly. Your lettuce or your onions or your carrots will only grow so quickly. And that's the beauty of reconnecting to the natural world. And understanding that natural systems take more time. And it's only in our kind of highly digitized environment that we've suddenly felt like things need to come to us quickly because we can go down to the grocery store and get what we need. And the idea now is just to slow down a little bit, to spend time observing your site, to spend time planting, and to watch these things grow and evolve over time. So I know that was a bit of a tangent, but there it is. I want to see what else. Okay, so Adrian says, next best step is 1, decide what my overall purpose and goal is for my space. 2, map out the space and plan my zones. Awesome. Lori, again, mapping the property, determining weather patterns a bit more, determine how best to lay out the food forest away from the dogs. Yes, dogs, big consideration. If your dog gets into stuff, that's a pattern. So that's a pattern that you definitely want to pay attention to. Can you fence him out? We have to have a certain amount of grass. We're also designing for our dog, right? A certain amount of grass for our dog. If you have children, you want to have a certain amount of grass for them to play on. And we have what's called the line of fetch. So we need to be able to throw the tennis ball from our backyard, our back door, to the edge of the gate. So we have to keep that space open. So that's a pattern that you have to keep in mind on your property for sure. Cool. Kay says, determine goals and analyze my property. And yes, plan ahead and implement in phases. Yes, absolutely, Chris. So highly recommended. So definitely this idea that if you have a master plan, you're going to lay it out. When I do this with clients, I lay out, what are you going to do spring, summer, fall of each growing season for, usually projected, depending on the scale of the property, usually projected, 5 years is kind of how long it would take to implement a plan. If you have a smaller site, it might only take 2 or 3. And it also depends on how much time you have and how much labor. A lot of that comes into kind of costs as well. How much do you have to dedicate to your property every year? So for us, we don't have a huge amount of capital to put into this every year, but that's actually been quite beneficial in terms of growing in increments as well. So say you have, we've had maybe $2,000 a year to invest in the property, whether that's plants, whether that's materials, whatever that might be. So that means that you kind of take it in bite-sized pieces that are manageable for you. So great, thank you for all of your next best steps. So we're gonna just wrap up here. The thing that I want you to take away the most from this is just, again, back to your vision. Just getting really clear on what your goals are. Of course, those can change and evolve over time, but it's a really good starting place, and it acts kind of as a rudder for all of the decisions that you make. So, should I buy a greenhouse? Should I have a greenhouse? Well, what are your goals? Should I expand my garden beds? What are your goals? Should I plant a bunch of fruit trees? I don't know. What are your goals? So that's something that you want to just keep top of mind. So lastly, or this quote I love by Robin Wall Kimmerer. If you've ever read the book Braiding Sweetgrass, it's amazing. Again, an invitation from the natural world that if we participate in these systems, they will give us a lot as we give back to them. So I want to go over what's next in terms of what you should do now. You came on this call, thank you so much for taking the time. And like I said before, this will be available on the forum, recorded. If you want to learn more about permaculture, definitely I'm going to be doing same format. Seems like this format is working for people. An introduction to permaculture. So I'm going to be going more in detail around the principles. So once you know your goals, once you understand your sectors and your zones, how can you use permaculture principles to approach the design of your property? So that's going to happen on Saturday, the 28th from 9 to 10 a.m. again in this forum. I have also a small space gardening. So for those of you who have smaller sites, I'll be doing a small space gardening class next Thursday. And then if you have any recommendations of other classes, please let me know and post that in the forum. So other ways that you can participate are, if you aren't signed up for my newsletter, if you go to my website, you can do that and you can sign up for my newsletter there. And then I also have an online edible backyard series. So this is a course where I go over designing, soil building, and actually planting in your garden. So if you're interested in that, it's on sale now. If you want to dig a little bit deeper, goes into a lot of detail and gives you kind of a structured way to move through the design and implementation of your property. So that is just to show you, if you go back to my website and you go on the home page and you go down to workshops and events, again, that's the Edible Backyard series online. So if you do want to take that and go through it, there are 3 modules on designing your edible landscape, building healthy soil, and then growing in your garden. So there are a bunch of worksheets associated with that. So if you want that, definitely go there for that. And then, of course, I do one-on-one garden consultation. So, and I actually do a lot of work with clients remotely. So if we can't, if we need to social distance, I can work with you online in terms of mentoring you through the design of your property. So just keep that in mind if you want a little more customized support. There's obviously a lot of support on this forum as well. So feel free there to participate in the forum and ask questions that if they're not answered by me, I'm sure someone else in this group will help answer them. So definitely, so one-on-one garden consultations if you need my support. Also, up until the time, unless we're going to be sheltering in place anytime soon, if it's a one-on-one garden consultation and we're 6 feet apart, I am happy to come and to your site if it's local. And then there are other things where I have a ton of resources on my blog. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, if you go again to my blog, I have a lot of different blog posts and videos that I do related to, again, those details that you might have questions about. So if you go to the categories, there's a lot of different categories: food, forest, garden ideas, all of that kind of stuff. So definitely check that out as well as a resource. A lot of free stuff there for you. And lastly, you're on the forum. I also have just a business page on Facebook, and you can follow me on Instagram. So let me know if you have any questions. And again, you can always contact me here. Let me just see if, great, thanks Chris for the ground cover. Again, continue to share your resources of what has worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, problem solving ideas. I want this forum to become a really good space for us to share our collective wisdom. So again, thank you so much for participating, and let me know if you have any follow-up questions to this class, and I'd be happy to help out. Thanks, everybody. Bye.